Good evening, and welcome to Dangerous Dialogue Stories from Palestine. My name is Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, and let's open up with a word of prayer. Holy One whom we call by many names, Allah, Elohim, God, Jesus. We come to you tonight seeking your wisdom, your guidance, and your presence. As we come to this crucial moment in time where your children are dying at the hands of their brothers and sisters. Babies are being sacrificed on the altar of our vengeance and our violence. Our world is turned upside down as we watch the loss of so many innocent lives. We ask that you would bring an end to this violence and use us as your tools to do so. Be with us in this conversation tonight as we seek to tell unfamiliar stories. As we come before you, we trust in you, are grateful to you, and ask that we would always be found useful for your purposes. Though we call on you by many names, we remain grateful to you in all of them. Amen. Dangerous Dialogues, Palestinian Stories. These tonight are dangerous dialogues, dangerous to the world as it is today, dangerous to an insular church focused on those within its four walls and their issues only, dangerous to a view of religion premised on rituals and not on acts of righteousness, dangerous to the world as it is unwilling to do right, unwilling to change, dangerous to the supremacist view that we are some better and some worse, dangerous to the perspective that we are some us and others them, dangerous to division, dangerous to hatred, dangerous to war, dangerous to an unjust status quo. While some of you might look at this conversation tonight and ask, where are the voices from Israel? Well, those are important stories. Those are necessary stories, but they are not the stories for tonight. Those stories are on our TVs. They are in our weekly online news feeds. They have found their way to us, found their home in so many of us. They are part of the commonplace narratives that we accept as true. They have become comfortable, familiar, and already our own stories in many of our hearts, shaping many of our perspectives. And that's why we are here tonight, to do the dangerous work of telling unfamiliar stories. Tonight we will hear stories that have not been heard, stories the world may have chosen to ignore, stories about Palestinian humanity, human suffering, human longing, human rights far too often denied. As we start off tonight, let me start off with familiar words from the book of Genesis, the first chapter, the 27th verse. There it says that we are all made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. We are all made in that image of God and made equally. But we human beings like to tell simple stories, one-sided stories, stories that often leave out unfamiliar, unwanted, uncomfortable perspectives. So tonight I want us to hear another narrative so that we can be sensitive to the equal humanity of all of God's children and to the equal need for peace, for justice, and for the opportunity to thrive. We cannot be faithful to our common God, in whose image we are all made, until we learn to value all human life and to do so equally. I'm grateful that we have a rich panel of people joining us this evening. And one of these is a dear friend of mine, a brilliant scholar, author, and world leader. Jimmy Hawkins was, for most recently, the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Durham, North Carolina. But for the last several years, he's headed up the Presbyterian Office of Public Witness in Washington, D.C., helping to take the message of the Presbyterian Church towards Congress, and the White House to make sure that they are paying attention to what thus says the Lord. He also heads up the mission in the UN, so his issues are both domestic and international. Jimmy, I'm grateful for your presence here, and I'd love for you to share a little bit with us about the work that you're doing and the perspective of the Presbyterian Church on what's going on in Gaza.
Dr. Sadler, thank you for this invitation to be a part of this important conversation. And I'm really excited that you're holding this conversation because the voice of the church definitely needs to be heard in the prophetic reign and to make sure that we are invested in what's going on in Gaza. The church, since it happened, since the actions of Hamas, the violence, the murder of Israeli citizens October the 7th, and then the resulting violence at the hands of the state of Israel towards the Palestinians, resulting in over 30,000 having lost their lives. The church has been in a state of lament, a state of repentance, a state of sorrow, of deep sadness, but also of determination to lift this voice to try to end this warring madness that we have before us. And so one of the first things that the Presbyterian Church did was to issue a statement calling for a ceasefire between the months of October and December. We issued several statements. Our state clerk issued a call to prayer. Our office issued a call to an end to violence, not only in Gaza, but also in the Sudan and in all parts of the world where innocent people are losing their lives in order that political leaders might seem to gain more power. So one of the things that we did that we were really hoping to make some headway in, we met with members of the White House administration's faith-based and neighborhood partnership office. We met in the Eisenhower building on the White House compound. Myself and ecumenical partners from the Friends and also from Sojourners and other faith communities in order to share with them our insistence that the violence end. We talked about in a rather prophetic way that while this was not our primary concern, but that young people were just gravely upset, and especially those who would have voted for this president, that they are talking about sitting out this campaign. And we see that surely came to be with the Michigan primary. The church has each day, as you stated, I direct two offices, the Washington Office of Public Witness and also the Presbyterian Ministry of the United Nations. At the UN, there's a constant vigil. Our staff there have been sitting in on Security Council meetings, especially when South Africa came to the council demanding a ceasefire. And also, we know that the declarations of the General Secretary of the UN have been quite strong and quite consistent and just worded in a way that leaves no questions about the fact that he considers this to be acts of genocide and that he is calling for a ceasefire. So our staff there have been monitoring these meetings and also participating in almost each way that it can. Each day there is a rally outside of the Israeli embassy in New York, and then on next Thursday there will be a march around the embassy 25 times. It's estimated to take about 5 hours as a silent protest against the violence, calling for an end to the destruction. We have issued with our ecumenical and interfaith partners just statement after statement, letters and statements to the White House and to members of Congress, affirming the need, the positions of many members of Congress, such as Bernie Sanders, who is calling not only for a ceasefire, but to say that any support that the United States gives to the state of Israel has to be conditional upon a ceasefire. We have had several encounters with members of Congress through our ecumenical partners, and had a conversation with Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland, just this past Monday, talking about what's going on there and really trying to make sure that the church has a loud and consistent voice. Our hearts are breaking our hearts are breaking. And we do want the Palestinian people to know that they have not been forgotten, and that there are many aspects of the different religious communities that are joining together. One rally in particular that was very powerful for me was that in DC on the Washington Mall, there was a Jews calling for a ceasefire rally, and led by the Jewish community, and led us in prayers, in traditional Hebrew services, with the insistence that a ceasefire must occur. So the voice of the church has been joined together. I know that there are many out there who have questions about what the church has done. We don't get the publicity that the naysayers get. We don't get on CNN or MSNBC. But I do want to assure our brothers and sisters, yes, we're writing statements, but we also are doing everything that we can to engage in conversations with those who are in positions of power in Washington, D.C. and in New York, to demand a ceasefire and more compassion. Lastly, I will say that one of the things that I wrote was a call for compassion, talking about how it's not about who's right or who's wrong, but children are dying, and innocent people are losing their lives. And above anything else, people of faith are called to be people of compassion, people of mercy, and that our understanding of justice is so radically different than the world's understanding. It's not an eye for an eye, but we believe that we take everything into consideration, and that violence is never a justifiable action, that we call for nations to use diplomacy, even in times of warfare. And so those are some of the actions of the church, and these actions will continue until the violence stops.
Thank you so very much, my brother, for all that good work that you're doing with the church, and may change soon come. People's lives are depending on this. I now want to turn the conversation over to a dear friend, a wonderful leader here in Charlotte for the Muslim community for some time, but more than that, graduate of Georgetown University with her PhD, assistant professor at Queen's University. Hadia Mubarak, you are a brilliant, wonderful scholar and activist. It's been a gift to watch you seek to define that third narrative, a third way of seeing in the midst of violent times that helps us to realize the full humanity of all the people who are involved and to seek a true, just peace. I want to turn it over to you so that you can introduce us to some of our storytellers this evening. Hadia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodney. It's really an honor to be with you and with the likes of Reverend Jimmy and all the great panelists tonight. I come to you tonight with a broken heart, a heart that has been utterly devastated by the images of death, destruction, starvation, and displacement that I have witnessed in the last 153 days. Yet the fact that you are all here tonight to listen to Palestinian narratives is a sign that you care. It is a sign of a healthy, beating heart, not just in the physical sense, but more importantly, in the spiritual sense. Unfortunately, it appears to me that people who care about the plight and suffering of our Palestinian brothers and sisters in humanity are a minority in this country. Our ability to empathize with the suffering of one group does not negate our ability to empathize with another group's suffering. It simply means that we are human and that we acknowledge the humanity of all people. I would like to thank the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation and the Union Presbyterian Seminary for creating this brave space, a space where critical dialogue is encouraged, not silenced, where intellectual curiosity is embraced, not stifled, and most importantly, a space in which the oppressed are allowed the equal opportunity to share their lived realities and experiences. For decades, Palestinian narratives have been reduced to headlines, to news headlines, charts, and statistics. The erasure of Palestinian stories from the public space is part of the dehumanization of Palestinians. In tonight's event, we disrupt the disconnect between the dominant discourses and representations of Palestinians and their lived realities. I would like to quote the words of the Palestinian poet and professor Rifat al-Arir, whose vibrant intellectual life was cut short on December 6, 2023, when an Israeli missile hit his sister's home, killing him and 6 of his family members. In his edited volume, Gaza Writes Back, Al-Arir reminds us that, in quotation, telling stories is an act of life, that telling stories is resistance, and that telling stories shape our memories. He further notes, no family gathering ever lacks one or more stories of those good old days when Palestine was the Palestine that current generations have not known or experienced directly. And since everyone has been subjected to stories and storytelling, there is a Palestine that dwells inside all of us, a Palestine that needs to be rescued, a free Palestine where all people, regardless of color, religion, or race, coexist. We may not be able to end this war, but we have a moral duty to witness the stories of Palestinians' hope, resilience, and heartbreak. The first speaker I will introduce is Professor Max Carter, who is a specialist in Quaker studies and has led over 30 service learning trips to the occupied Palestinian territories in Israel since the 1970s. He is the author of 3 books about the search for peace and justice in Palestine. He has taught at and served on the board of the Friends School in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, and in over the past 20 years has enabled more than 36 students from the occupied Palestinian territories to attend Guilford College with significant financial assistance. Thank you, Dr. Carter.
Thank you, Hadi, and thank you all who are participating in this. In 1972, when I returned from 2 years of teaching at the Quaker School in Ramallah in the occupied Palestinian West Bank, and shared my story of those 2 years back in the United States, I was shocked to hear the stereotypes about Palestinians that were so embedded in people's minds and descriptions. Doubt about their even humanity, a dehumanization and stereotyping that sadly we see now leads to death and destruction and othering. And so I felt compelled to share my experience as much as I could of the grace, the humanity, the hospitality of Palestinian people. And one of the stories that stands out in my memory that I often share and I want to share tonight is from one of our service learning trips in 2001 during the first summer of the Second Palestinian Intifada in 2001. We were doing our volunteer service at the Ramallah Friends School, and our program coordinator, Mohammed Salim, after one morning of work, asked if we would like to walk through the city and see the destruction wrought the night before by a military Israeli assault on a residential neighborhood where his cousin lived with her husband and 3 small children. So we accompanied Mohammed through Ramallah, through El Birre, past the governmental headquarters to a residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Ramallah. And as we approached that residential neighborhood with no military significance or security significance, we began seeing the results of that military assault the night before. A burned out house, a grocery store with an artillery shell right through one of the walls, a police post destroyed, and then we came to Muhammad's cousin's house. And we gazed in horror as we saw tattered curtains fluttering through vacant windows, pockmarked limestone of the house from bullet marks. And as we watched and took it in, Nadia emerged, a 27-year-old mother of 3, wife of a young man, cousin of Muhammad. And she recognized us as an American group. And she came storming towards us and was just inches from my wife Jane's face as she began to scream at us. And you call us the terrorists. You call us the terrorists. And then she began describing the horror, the terror of the night before. Around 3 a.m, as they heard the noise of the military assault, their 3 small children came screaming, terrified, into their bedroom, and they all huddled together on the floor as bullets ricocheted around their bedroom for almost half an hour. Miraculously, they survived. And that morning, just a few hours before we visited them, they started sweeping up the debris, the damage, and they recognized the empty shell casings were made in the United States. And you call us the terrorists. And we took it in, we listened, we apologized, we offered our condolences, and assured her that we were appalled too, that our country was complicit. She began to calm a little bit and excused herself to go back in the house and came out with a tray of soft drinks and apologized to us that she couldn't offer us any more, but so much had been destroyed the night before. We gratefully accepted the drinks, but we're still shaken as we bid her goodbye, offering again our condolences, our sympathy. As we walk to our next program, still shaken, we talked with each other. What can we do? How can we respond to this as American citizens complicit in this? A previous speaker that week had told us that on average, every American man, woman, and child gives $25 in military assistance to Israel through our tax money. $3.8 billion annually in military aid. So we knew what we had to do. We passed a hat, which some of us Quakers come equipped with, broad brim, and those who could gave $25 or more. And we put the money together, gave it to Muhammad, and asked him if he could take it over to Nadia's house so they could start rebuilding. We didn't hear for several days from Nadia. We wondered if she'd been offended, if her family felt it was blood money, and we worried about how that gesture was received. But the last night we were in Ramallah, we were enjoying another sumptuous Palestinian meal at Muhammad's house, and the phone rang. It was Nadia. She asked if the Americans were there and if it'd be okay to come over and introduce us to her husband and her children. And of course, we were delighted. They arrived a few moments later, and we just chit-chatted about common, ordinary things, child raising, school, such things. And then Nadia, covered, conservative Muslim woman, paused and asked me, "Are Quakers Christians?" Well, I teach a whole semester of that theology in Quaker studies at Guilford College. My wife, knowing that, elbowed me in the ribs and said, "Just say yes." And I did. And Nadia said, I thought so, but I didn't want to offend. And then this woman who had almost been killed by American aid militarily reached into her bag and pulled out little Christian tokens to give to each of us as souvenirs of her gratitude. Olive wood crosses from Bethlehem, Crusader crosses from Jerusalem, and apologized to us for having vented before. We assured her we could understand, and certainly we're not offended by her venting. Well, I could end the story right there. That gesture of hospitality, of grace, of humanity to people she could easily have hated and assigned guilt as Americans for what had almost killed her and her family. But there's more. The following year, 2002, after my wife had attended the wedding of one of our Guilford College students in a little village of Deir Debwan, she went into Ramallah to stay with some friends and enjoy the hospitality of Ramallah for a few weeks. But that night, the Israeli army came in, reoccupied Ramallah, and imposed a total curfew. A few days later, the curfew was lifted for a couple of hours, and she went out to walk in the neighborhood and heard a voice saying, "Jane, Jane, is that you?" It was Nadia. They embraced, they caught up with each other, Then Nadia asked my wife, "Would you please come home and talk with my children about how to love the enemy? All they know of the other, of the enemy, is soldiers, those at checkpoints, those who'd almost killed us in that night assault. I don't want them to hate. I don't want them to grow up hating the other. Could you please help me teach them how to love?" That's the Palestinians I know. Not dehumanized, not human animals, but loving, gracious, hospitable children of God. And that's how we should all view them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Carter. That was incredible. I will now introduce our next speaker. Nasreen Saad is an educator in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm blessed to actually have her as the teacher of my daughter, Jinan. Nasreen is also a graduate of the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. She's a Palestinian American born in New York and raised in Florida. She's a mother of 2 girls, and today she will share her story visiting the occupied West Bank in the summer of 2023. Thank you, Nasreen.
Thank you so much for giving me the platform to share my story here tonight. We will return. January 18th, 103 days into the genocide in Gaza, a Palestinian American from New Orleans, Tawfiq Ajak, 17 years old, was killed and murdered in cold blood in my hometown, Al-Mizrah Sharqiya, northwest of Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank. Tawfiq moved to Al-Mizrah with his family in May of 2023 to do what many Palestinian American families do: take their children back to preserve their homeland and learn about their heritage. He was out with a few friends barbecuing by our olive trees when a group of extremist settlers attacked and murdered Tawfiq. Tawfiq is one of 369 people killed by Israeli troops and settlers in the occupied West Bank since October 7th, including 95 children, not to mention the thousands taken hostage in brutal Israeli prisons, many held without charge. As soon as I heard this news, it took me back to July 2023. My family had returned to our homeland to celebrate the marriage of my brother. I wondered when I heard the news of Ajak's killing. Was he killed on the same roads I passed that were blocked off by an Israeli checkpoint? Was there a settler wall dividing a Palestinian town and a legal settlement nearby? Was this close to the roads that illegal settlers would throw stones on white plate Palestinian cars? All flashbacks from my recent trip where I never felt safe at any point of my visit home. Tawfiq, seeking solace during the tense days of wars, unknowingly participated in a barbecue that would be his last. This is the reality of many who will not be forgotten. It also brought me back to the way the Israeli offensive forces treats Palestinian children. All Palestinians are targets. Again, all Palestinians are targets. It was July 23rd. I wanted to take my eldest daughter, Maryam, to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque, the holy site for Muslims. The Israeli offensive forces denied her entry and verbally, physically attacked her. They accused her of lying about her age despite her documented paperwork. The female Israeli soldier roughly grabbed my child by the shoulder, took her for questioning in isolation, and my daughter came back crying and shaking. We were only minutes away from Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we were denied entry. Israel can deny entry to American citizens, Palestinians, even if you are an American citizen. So that doesn't matter. From visiting Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and the rest of Israel proper. Ajak's killing and my daughter's experience with the Israeli army prompt me to ask, will my children be able to return home one day? Will we have a homeland to return to? I too have hopes and dreams for a free Palestine where I can safely return home with my children. Right now, it's anything but safe. But we will return. Despite the harassment of the Israeli occupation forces, we will return. Despite the checkpoints, we will return. Despite the illegal occupation and apartheid walls, we will return. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nasreen. The next speaker I will be introducing is Khalid Balata. Khalid is a first-generation Palestinian American and a proud son of parents from the Gaza Strip. As an Ohio State aerospace engineering graduate, he enjoyed the privileges of education, healthcare, and freedom of speech. He did not take those freedoms for granted, as he experienced a direct contrast in access to those rights for family members who lived the harsh realities of life under occupation. Khalid intimately recognized his freedoms while visiting his grandparents and family, who were forcibly relocated to the besieged Gaza Strip after escaping the 1948 Nakba massacres. Thank you, Khalid, for joining us.
Thank you, Hadia, and hopefully you guys can hear me and see my screen. Perfect. Thank you. Good evening, and it's my privilege to be here today and to be given the space to share my story in such dark and historically challenging days. I want to pause for a second and just acknowledge the real-time genocide that's ongoing right now, and recognize that together, if we organize, we can help bring a change. If you allow me, and may I quote a verse from Ecclesiastes. This is not something I'm used to reading, but it quotes that though one may be overpowered and two can defend themselves, a cord of three strands is not quickly broken. So let's collectively work together to call for a ceasefire in any way that we can. Today, I'll be sharing a story that I took about a trip that I took to Gaza Strip when I was a young adolescent, I think 13 to 15 years old. So as you can see on the slide, I actually lived in a city 45 minutes north of Dubai. It was called Ras Al Khaimah. And that night, I remember my mom was packing the bags, getting ready to make sure that me and my sister and herself were ready to go the next morning. I really was excited about the summers that we spent in Gaza because, it comes with beach days, building sandcastles, flying kites, or going home and eating grandma food or dancing with family members in the courtyards of our home. I was also enthusiastic about the trip this time because I was going to fly the same 12 noon flight from Dubai to Cairo with my friend Hazim, who was an Egyptian classmate of mine and one of my best friends. I remember him asking me, hey, you're not Egyptian, so why fly to Cairo instead of just going straight to Gaza Strip? As you can see on the map, it's kind of a shorter flight anyways. I laughed and I told him that, we would, but the Israeli occupation forces, and the warplanes they have destroyed Gaza's little airport so many years ago, and not too long since it actually opened. So my family actually got to travel through it one time before it was bombed. So the only lifeline connecting Gaza to the outside world was cut and severed, the connection to Gaza and also the freedom of Gaza people to travel and be where they want to be. It was probably one of the first steps to what until 153 or so days ago was described as an open air prison and now is described as a slaughterhouse. 2 million people stuck inside of it. So I remember asking my mom, are we there yet? I asked her as we pulled into the Dubai airport. That terminal was one of my favorite portals because it was essentially how I got to Europe one time and how I planned to go visit my family. But it was also, as a future aerospace engineer, I was really excited to see planes, take off and go smaller, or, just the operations to get a plane ready. So it was a really cool time to get to the airport. But why I mentioned that, because really soon we were flying and landing in Cairo. And what you can see is a 4-hour flight into Cairo. At the airport, we had to separate from Hazm because I was, Palestinian American, but more so my mother was only Palestinian. She was not an American. And so she had to endure humiliation and indignity at any airport she visited, really, but especially so in Egypt, and even more for the people that are only there to transit by land into Gaza. So she would go through questions like, what are you doing here? Who will you stay with? And, really privacy invading questions. But hours later, I boil over with frustration. Like 3 hours into the airport, I yell at her, "Mom, are we almost done yet?" All I wanted to do was to leave and take that 45-minute drive south to my uncle's house. Despite that home being, modest in size, it really overflew with love and hospitality, because it was a comforting, warm shower and a good, tasty Egyptian meal that prepared my mother, my sister, and myself for a even longer, more treacherous journey that came ahead. And right at midnight that night, I remember my uncle, and bear in mind, we're now like, over 12 hours into this trip that we left from my home in Ras Al Khaimah in the UAE. My uncle comes to the bedroom that we're in at like midnight and says, "Hello, it's time to go," with his, Egyptian accent. So we left the house and got into a taxi, and I was really anxious, but as soon as we hit the highway, the wind was blowing through the windows, good music was playing, like Amr Diab or something. Everything went away, and I was just connected to this deep sensation of wanderlust that, connects me and really is crucial for my personality nowadays. A couple hours in, I'm snoozing away, and I hear the car and I sense it coming to a stop, and I'm wondering, hey, are we there yet? And the funny thing, the driver starts laughing, and I look in the back seat and I see my mom preparing her bag. He says, "No, we're at the Suez Canal, and as you can see, it's kind of like right in the middle of this map right here. So it's really where you leave the African continent and you kind of get towards the Sinai, the Sinai Desert into Gaza." But at this spot right here, I learned something that, despite seeing this really huge bridge that we could easily get on a car and keep going, we'd had to stop on the side and take a ferry across, because lo and behold, Palestinians were not allowed to use a bridge. So something that you don't really hear normally. Anyhow, so I tried to, during my time that I'm waiting over there, 14 hours into a trip, try to use my imagination and, thinking what I could do and jump on these ships and wondering where they're all headed. But soon enough, it was our turn to actually get going with our trip. And so we were docking on the other side, and we were ready to take the last final stretch across the desert to the Rafah crossing. This is really a desert. There's not much going on from a city perspective, but it's a very beautiful area. And as a explorer myself, I always imagine what would it be like to stop and, I don't know, get an Airbnb at the ocean here somewhere, or at the beach somewhere. But we always had to get in the car and keep going. So I always felt like a connection to that place. But on this long trip, I got to experience the driver's life and got to know more about the driver, and just witnessed the contrast between how he treated us and how officials at airports would treat us for being Palestinian. So it was just starting to understand that being Palestinian came with added struggles in life. And so 21 hours later, we get to the Rafah crossing, and one would think that we're there, but we're pretty far from actually getting to where we need to be here in North Gaza. So we get to the crossing, and as we pull in, I hear my sister in the back for the first time say, "Hey, are we finally there yet?" She's a very quiet girl, and I love her, but that was funny, because she had, we almost forgotten that she was with us on the trip from how quiet she is, and she came to ask at the last moment. And so we were at the Rafah crossing around 7:45 a.m. And we made it in, and I was kind of worried, okay, this time, my mom's going to prepare all these money, fees and taxes that are surely going to make someone really rich, because they went to random companies. I was wondering, how are they going to humiliate her this time? And the tensions in the crossing were very high. And so I was, thinking like, it's time for her to go through more humiliation. But to my surprise, that one time, her and my sister got their passports really quickly, and it was almost noon, 5-6 hours into the crossing, where you should just show someone your passport and walk in. I hadn't gotten my passport as an American citizen. I was like, oh, I've never experienced such a thing. And so I walk up to the clerk, and I as soon as I walk up there and I ask if everything is okay, that he starts laughing and say that, "There he is, we've been looking for you." And then, in a blur of situations, I find myself in an isolated room, being interrogated by someone who I describe as Amr Diab's evil twin. They literally look the same. Maybe that's my imagination, but hey, that's what you look like in my head. But he was asking me the questions like, hey, how come you're American? Or why are you visiting Gaza? Questions that don't really mean anything. If I haven't done anything wrong and my documents are correct, just let me go. But all I know is that, you navigate the situation carefully, and then, he stamps my passport and just leaves, after a total waste of time and essentially traumatizing a child. And I could hear my mom yelling down the hallway, let my son go and whatever. And so, almost a day and 7 hours later, I just walk out and I'm just screaming at my mom, like, time to go. I just want to get out of here. We're finally almost, crossed this line, imaginary line that, divides Egypt and Palestine. So I just focused on the exit door and I wanted to leave. And at that moment, you go through a quick process on the Palestinian side, but you quickly go to meet your family. And I remember my sister running past me and going towards my uncle's, and I ran towards my uncle and hugged him and kissed him. My uncle Ayman. I remember his fork. I called him Forky Uncle because it would scratch my face when he would kiss my face. And that was 31 hours after leaving our home, or 32 hours to actually get that 40-minute drive into the city where we lived, instead of just a 3.5-hour flight. And you can imagine that was happening every summer for me. So it really was quite the trip, but it made it all worth it because, I got to see my family in the end. And so the urgency today is really, it's devastating with the ongoing genocide because my uncle Ayman that I mentioned not too long ago, I lost him along with 16 family members in Gaza since October, along with his daughter Lema, who was my sister's best friend, or similarly aged, early college students. There's shortage of water and food and medicine for the people in Gaza right now, and people wanting to leave and flee can't even afford it because it's 10 grand per person to leave Gaza from the same border that we crossed. So just trying to raise awareness that people really can't leave and people shouldn't have to flee or even look to the sky and wonder if the thing falling is aid or a bomb. It's just really a nightmare of what's going on, and I hope that my story today and the sign behind me that I created with my own hands, you don't need to be a Muslim to support Palestinian cause. You just need to be a human being. So I just want to take the time and rest in peace to the family members I lost and to all the wonderful people in Gaza. And the prayers go out to the resilient people in Gaza right now, and let's join for a collective action. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for that powerful testimony of your experiences and the fact that, again, I just want to make it clear for those who are unaware of how much it would normally take to travel from the UAE to a city in Gaza. If there were no, again, if without these oppressive structures, right, that restrain Palestinian mobility, it would literally be a couple of hours. I've traveled myself from Dubai, the same airport that Kala describes, to Jordan, Amman, Jordan, and it's like a 2.5-hour flight, right? And Amman, by the way, is even past Gaza, right? And it takes me 2.5 hours. So the fact that it takes him over a day, right? And I hope that you take that away from his story, because unless we recognize the extent to which Palestinians' day-to-day mobility is impeded by the occupation, we will never understand why we will never understand the intensity of the suffering. And that just, there are a host of other restraints that we haven't touched upon, such as the checkpoints, which I think some of others have touched upon. Now, our next speaker, I'm excited to introduce. She recently graduated, Aya Azorbi, from Queen's University of Charlotte with a bachelor's degree in biology and pre-medicine. She was a president of the Muslim Students Association at Queen's and a campus leader for Potlucks for Pluralism, part of Mecklenburg Ministries, among other leadership positions. She was born and raised in Charlotte, but she proudly represents her Palestinian identity. Every chance she gets, she has been to Palestine several times, and she will speak to us today about her experiences there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mubarak. Peace be upon you all. I'm so thankful to be here today and to hear again the experiences of so many different people. I'm so grateful for all of you for organizing this and just giving us the opportunity to present our voices, especially when we do feel so silenced. I hope you all will forgive me for my stuffy voice. I'm overcoming a little bit of a cold. But this cold has allowed me to realize so much of my privilege through such a tiny misfortune. Just how privileged I am to have access to simple cold medicine in a dry home, and a doctor, a running hospital, a loving mother and father who have tended to me as I overcome sickness, and how absolutely heartbreaking it is for me to know that my Palestinian brothers and sisters are in the worst of circumstances, the most inhumane treatment, intense, flooded by rain and overcome by the cold of night. They're dealing with starvation, illness, amputations, injuries, infections, and so much more without the basic necessities to treat them. Palestine is a place that holds the very essence of my identity. It's a place that seems so distant physically, and yet it's intrinsically woven into the fabric of my being. Though I cannot be in Palestine now beside my brothers and sisters to be shoulder to shoulder as they experience this ongoing pain and suffering, I find myself tethered to its soil by the unbreakable threads of my mind, my heart, and my soul. I wrestle with the guilt of being safe in a country of opportunity, while so many brilliant Palestinian minds are stripped of their opportunity. Yet my soul yearns to be with my family back home. And yes, I call Palestine home, though I was not raised there, and my experiences with the occupation are few compared to those who live there. It will always be where I belong. We are a displaced people, and yet our hearts and souls forever reside in the beautiful hills of Palestine, the deep roots of the olive trees, and every stitch in our traditional cross-stitched clothing. Every time I visit Palestine, I feel peace, but in the face of the occupiers, I would often feel anger. Whether it was at the checkpoints, in the airport, or on the way to our beloved Dome of the Rock, we were constantly faced with the evil of the Israeli occupation forces. I remember every step I took towards the glorious Masjid al-Aqsa. I previously had reveled in all of its beauty, stood in awe at the beauty of the olive trees on its grounds, the perfectly painted murals and the Arabic calligraphy on its walls. But with each step I took, I was also aware of the poison around me. As the Israeli occupation forces pushed and shoved young people around us, and even the elderly, they stopped my younger brother on the way to our prayer in one of the holiest sites, and suddenly I only felt unsettled and angry. Angry that a place of peace and faith was tainted by their hatred. But once I got to the mosque and sat in all its glory and recited the many prayers I had memorized, I looked around to see the faces of elderly Palestinian women smiling, knowing that they lived there, were born there, and experienced 100 times more of the trials of occupation than I had in my short time there. I felt the anger in my heart leave. How could I be angry in this moment, in a place that people long to come to, a place that people are turned away from as they literally can see it from just a couple feet away? While these elders are sitting here with smiles on their faces, they face the Israeli occupation forces every Friday prayer, and yet they still keep coming back. True, they must feel anger, sorrow, and pain, and yet they do not let it blind them. As a people, we are resilient in the face of adversity, unwavering in the pursuit of justice, and remain constant in our love for the land, as it is a testament of the strength that flows through our veins. This is why you see people in my generation, whether they grew up there or not, with such a passionate love for their Palestinian identities. Every day I carry the memory of my sitto's garden, my tata's beautiful handmade tatriz, my grandfather's faith in the strength of his people, a people he has watched struggle through occupation since he was 6 years old. He is now almost 86 years old. They are each olive trees, witnessed generations deeply rooted to the land and symbols of a people unwilling to be uprooted. Just as the olive tree remains firmly anchored, so too does the spirit of the Palestinian people. Today, I make a solemn promise to keep the flame of hope alive, to be an advocate for justice, and to forever remind the world of the Palestinian identity. For I know I will not allow for my generation to stay blind, to stay unaware, or to bend to the wrongdoers. I will not allow for us to go numb as our screens are flooded with the horrifying images of my Palestinian family being slaughtered in front of the world, flooding our Instagram feeds as if they are just another spectacle for the world to swipe past. I will not allow for the term humanity to be thrown around by those with no conscience, who would say anything just for the sake of their image. We will keep fighting from wherever we are until the day Palestine is finally free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayazobi, for that testimony of your experiences in the occupied Palestinian territories. I am honored to introduce our next storyteller, Fatima Shad. Fatima is a graduate from Union College, New York, with a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering and a minor in electrical engineering. Fatima moved to the United States after graduating high school in the Gaza Strip, where she grew up. Both of her parents were active doctors in the Gaza Strip, specifically in Rafah at the beginning of this violence. Fatima utilized her connections through her immediate family members and started multiple initiatives, such as the One Body Initiative, which provides tents and other resources to Gazans under the blockade. Her goal is to create bridges between local activists and families within Gazan organizations and families. I will say that Fatima's family is still in Gaza as we speak, and I cannot imagine, Fatima, what it must be like for you to witness what we're all witnessing in front of our very eyes on social media, knowing that your family's there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for holding this webinar, and thanks for everyone that spoke today. Aya, your poem was really touching. Yeah, so I graduated high school in Gaza, in Rafah, which was a small town. Nobody has ever heard of it, not many people. And right now, it's making news headlines. I'm seeing my city everywhere in a way that, in the worst way possible, in the most unjust way to it. 5 years ago, when I first came here, and I would say I'm from Rafah, nobody would know the streets of Rafah, the small downtown that's full of life. When I would name a hospital like El Shifa Hospital, Nasser Hospital, my memories and my stories to it was how you walk out from it, you're sick, you had a procedure, you had a checkup, then all the life outside of it, all the aunties and uncles trying to sell their farm-raised vegetables are there, and you suddenly feel, okay, you're healed. Right now, I'm seeing all these lives, all these places in use as places that don't exist anymore. Since October 7th, I've been watching my childhood memories, my teenage dreams, and my college prep sessions get bombarded on live TV, where I applied to get my SAT exams to come here to college, where I did my visa applications, the bank I went to, places I studied in, teachers that taught me that have passed away. I still, until this day, don't know who from my classmates and my other friends and that I literally graduated with, who's alive and who's not. I've texted some family relatives and I've never heard from them yet. During the genocide, both of my parents are doctors, and my dad was working in the hospital, which meant risking his life every time in Al Orobi Hospital, Khan Yunis Rafah, and the main hospital in the south. My schedule has turned to Gaza time. It was life stopped since then, and it's all about checking with their time. If they don't respond, go over news, go over maybe tens and hundreds of news messages, just hope that your family's name is not there, your house is not there. And that's how I would know they're alive, until I could hear from them the next day or days after. And then I started a lot of people were reaching out to me at how they're dying with no shelter, with no food, with nothing. And I decided to turn all this pain and anger and fear for my family and anxiety into being productive, into starting initiatives in Gaza. The major one, the biggest success has been the One Body initiative. Through it, I managed to work with a team in Gaza. Started with my cousins, and then other local initiatives from Gaza. And we've built over 100 tents to people. I knew some people that stayed in the street until that I was in touch with them, until we managed to get our money to them, to our teams, to build them tents. Same thing. It's still going with blankets, with any essential needs. It's literally the lifeline. And then all of my family, me feeling so so basically with no power, so powerless here. All my family members, my friends are reaching out to me saying, Fatma, you're in the US right now. We hear that you can't, you've been starting to do charity and help cousins. And I feel guilty for being here while they're dying. I couldn't even look at food in the beginning of genocide. And I was like, I'm not eating. I'll eat whatever my family is going to eat. And for the first 2 months until I started coping with this, I ate plain rice and bread, even though I'm in Cary, North Carolina, and I had all the food resources. But I couldn't not imagine seeing my mother ever again, or my father. So, and with these people as well, with my friends. So I wanted to use the privilege of me being here to connect these people. And I've had connected these people, these families, with people here that were willing to sponsor them to evacuate Gaza through the ways Egyptians are putting it for Gazans, or sponsor their tents and stay in touch with them to basically keep checking on them weekly and getting them things weekly. I'm sorry I went all over the place, but what I'm trying to say is this fight is the power is really in our hands, politically and in humanitarian ways. We are the people, and when we chant and protest, the people united will never be defeated. I've been seeing it as an example coming to life through all of this work. And with all of this work, I would like to emphasize that Palestine is not just our charity project. Palestine is our liberation project. And while we keep going in our big fight for liberation and the slow political momentum, at the same time, we should be really connecting and helping on the ground.
Thank you so much, Fatima. And we'd also love to hear more about how we can support any humanitarian work over there as well. I think Reverend Rodney Sadler will be joining us for the Q&A and opening the floor for questions and answers.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Hadia. I also want to say thank you to all of our guests this evening for the wonderful messages that you have delivered, the stories that you've told that have contextualized what's going on, personalized them with your own stories. All of you have shared so much with us. Max, Nisreen, Khalid, Aya, Fatima, and of course, Hadia, you set the context so perfectly. as you began that. So just a few things I want to ask, but I want to see if there are any questions from the audience. So while I ask the first few questions, audience, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have, and we'll try to get them all in. So one of the first things I want to ask is simply, why is this issue around the world, this issue across the seas, something that we as Americans should be concerned about? Why should we be concerned about it and involved in doing something now? And anyone, please jump in.
I guess I'll go. My answer is pretty simple, is because I think it was Max that said an estimate of $25 comes out of each one of our pockets. And we, the people, are the boss, not the people behind a desk somewhere. So we make the calls, we make the shots collectively.
It is our obligation. We've invested in the occupation. We need to invest in the liberation. Thank you. Thank you.
I would just add to that also that, yeah, there's approximately $3 billion in aid that goes to, to Israel with no conditions, right? Any other country that receives foreign aid from the United States, there are conditions to that aid, except with Israel. And that's why we saw Josh Paul resign from his post earlier, and because of that, right? And so, for example, there should be a commitment to abide by international law. There should be a commitment to allow humanitarian aid in. There should be a commitment to not be building illegal settlements that are illegal according to international law, that then require roads to be built that can only be used by Jewish settlers, right? That then require more and more infrastructure just to support those illegal settlements. So all of these would not be happening without direct US support. And that's why I've, for a very long time, felt that it's imperative for Americans to have a better understanding of what's happening, because we're all complicit, whether or not we intend to be, because of our tax dollars.
Yes.
Max here, I would add, especially since this is a theologically sponsored program, that recently in one of our dialogue groups here in Greensboro, between some of us Quakers, members of the Palestinian community, and the Jewish community, one of our Palestinian partners was talking about the importance of understanding the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And as she shared about that, a Jewish rabbi in the dialogue group said, "And you know who the most powerful Zionists supporting the occupation are in the United States? Christians." So I think we as Christians, I know not everyone on this call is, but there are more than 60 million Christian Zionists in the United States who have enormous political power and financial resources that support what is happening now in the occupation, and support the carnage in Gaza. So there's another reason I think we have an important stake in this.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
And I would just say a few words. I really agree with the prior statements about our responsibility as Americans, because we are investing in this genocide and everything that's happening to the Palestinian people. And as Max has indicated, we all have several identities. And for me, my strongest identity is as a person of faith. And all of our religions, whether you are Muslim, Jewish, or Christian, God demands that we recognize our common humanity. We are all, regardless of who you are, made in the image and likeness of God. And therefore, what impacts Palestinians is my responsibility, because they are indeed my brothers and my sisters. And so as a person of faith, that identity overrides my American identity, because I know that this country is just torn apart, and especially for African American Christians, we read the Bible and we have a sense of identification with Israel that blinds us oftentimes to what's happening to the Palestinian people. But I will say that I'm very pleased with many of the African American leaders in this country. The AME and AME Zions are coming together and really pushing for an unconditional ceasefire. And so again, as a person of faith, our common humanity demands that we care for one another.
Thank you so much. Oh. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Why should we care?
I mean, there's two things, Rodney, I'd love to point out. One is that this is really a humanitarian issue. I mean, as Reverend Jimmy just pointed out, it's not, a lot of people want to say, oh, it's complicated, it's a political issue. No, I mean, there are people dying. And when people are dying, when over 13,000 children have died in 150 days, I don't care who you are. If you have a beating human heart, that should cause some alarm. That should make us wake up and say, what is going on? And I think something you both pointed out, is that we're not starting out on neutral. We're starting out with all these cognitive biases we have against Arab populations from decades and decades of misrepresentations, stereotypical representations of Arabs as terrorists and villains and as people who are inherently violent, right? I mean, we're seeing this play out in the real world today, where Arabs are not allowed to speak. They're not allowed to speak their truth unless they first say, we condemn terrorism. It's like, of course we condemn terrorism. Why are you presuming that I am an inherently violent person unless I say otherwise? Do we ask, to be frank, do we ask white people in America to condemn the KKK and condemn the institution of slavery and everything else before we even listen to them, before they can utter a word? Yet we have that double standard when it comes to Arabs and Muslims, and we're seeing it like play out. We're seeing the blatant racism play out in news media across the country. And so that's just something I wanted to bring to everyone's attention.
Amen. Thank you so much for that. That two-facedness, that lack of equality in the way that we view humanity is pervasive and quite obvious. Just a simple question. I'm going to ask everyone to try to give me an answer to this question. And I'll start off with Aya. What would it look like? Real peace, what would that look like? And what would it take to see it come to fruition in your estimation?
Well, it's a $1,000,000 question that I feel like everybody kind of asks. But when you look at history and you look at the way Palestine used to be and the way many places used to be, with so many different people living together, you can have peace at any one moment. I'm sure we've seen these clips of these people that are talking about the way that we frame peace as like this is something that um, makes or breaks whether you're living in a good nation. But we see peace every day here in the US. I mean, we feel at peace in our homes. We're just watching TV, putting on our Netflix shows. We feel at peace when we're in prayer, when we're meditating, doing yoga, whatever. We feel peace at many instances in life. But peace does not mean that there's no injustice in this country. We know for a fact there's injustice against many of our communities, the African American community, the Native American community, Arab individual, all these communities that are going through horrific injustices right here in the US. And yet we do have peace in this country. But do we have justice and do we have freedom for all? No, we don't. And I feel like the same can be used to compare what's happening in Palestine. Yes, we feel at peace when we go to visit our families. We feel at peace when we're finally in our homelands. But does that mean that we're free or that there is justice when we go or that we are being treated as equals or have the same rights as the Israeli neighbors living just a couple feet away from us? No, that's not the case. So I feel like in order for us to have this quote unquote peace and to have this complete justice for all is to first look at what is wrong with the system that we're living under, what's wrong with the way that we're treating one group versus another. And until we do that, we will never have this definition of peace that we speak about.
Thank you. Thank you. Nisreen, Fatima, would you like to weigh in on this?
I think Aya said that perfectly.
Yes, she did. She was
Um,
wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, just bouncing off what Aya said, during my visit this past summer, um, brought me back to just kind of the history of this country with, segregation and slavery. And something that I always teach my students is the reason why we learn about our history, right, is so that we don't make the same mistakes over and over again. But obviously, we haven't learned from our history if, these atrocious acts are still happening. So what peace looks like, I think the first thing that we need to do is start humanizing Palestinians. We need to stop degrading them, humiliating them. I've lost count of how many days we're into this genocide, 150 something.
153, is it?
It's in the 150s. In the early days, I was keeping a tally, but yeah. So I think first start humanizing Palestinian lives. Not just a Instagram post that we see, and it's not someone who's white and blue-eyed, so it doesn't matter to me, right? That's I think the first step towards peace. If people in Gaza were being bombed and now they're being starved, right? More people are probably going to die from starvation and hygiene issues, and just the aid is there. We can let it in. We're just not allowing that aid in, right? So I think the first thing we need to do is start humanizing Palestinians, start treating them like people, like the people that they are. So yeah, and then, I do believe that there's a pathway to peace. Unfortunately, it might be a distant path, but I think the first thing that we can do is start valuing Palestinian lives.
Amen. Thank you. I know that we're running short on time, so I want to jump into some of the questions coming in from the audience. One question is by William Brooks, says, how do we correct the Israeli commitment to settlement in incursions into the lands of Palestinian homes? How do we correct this? And I know that that's a difficult question.
Max here, it is a very difficult question because the Israeli government now is dominated by settlers. And much of that is supported by the United States. Our tax dollars have gone to build the infrastructure of these settlements and their security system, so-called. And yet, if our governmental leaders had the courage simply to say, no, we will no longer allow this to happen with the support of our financial assistance, it could stop. But we don't have that courage because politically, both dominant parties owe allegiance to lobbies that support this occupation. And yet, I still hold out hope that given what has happened in Minnesota, in Michigan, even here in North Carolina, I think 11% of Democratic voters said no preference, that the message is getting through that just say no applies to a variety of things, but especially now to supporting financially and with our vetoes in the UN Security Council, this oppression and this occupation.
Thank you. Okay. I want a question here that seems like it's tailor-made for you, Jimmy Hawkins. Why haven't more progressive churches come out publicly in support of Gaza?
Well, again, I referred earlier to the fact that we're not getting the media. I think more progressive churches are. Again, I'm situated in Washington, D.C., and every day the Churches for Middle East Peace, the National Committee for Legislation, the Presbyterian Church, we're issuing statements. Our problem is that the national media is not paying any attention. They only give access and publicity to the more conservative, controversial voices. And so I would encourage all of us who are of the Christian faith to really do some investigation into the statements that your denomination is issuing, because there are very strong statements being issued, but they're being circulated in-house, and we're just finding very difficult means to get them publicized. And even as a Presbyterians email me each day, why isn't the church saying something? I'm saying, we are saying something, but we're saying it in a way that is not capturing the mainstream imagination. I mean, CNN publicizes nothing that any denomination has said, and there's some very strong statements being issued. The National Council of Churches, all are issuing statements. So again, I think we have got to be more intentional, but we're publicizing them in-house, but we just can't seem to get the word out to others. But we are directly connecting with the administration, White House, on a daily basis, and also with members of Congress. And we are trying to really work with members of Congress who are speaking out, like AOC and again, Bernie Sanders and others who are calling for an immediate ceasefire.
Amen. And dare I say, it might be wonderful, instead of just having the church leaders come out to say something, it might be nice to bring all these church leaders around the country together in DC to stand together and say something collectively about what's going on. I think if they saw all progressive church leaders come together with some enlightened evangelical church leaders coming together, there might be some shift in our American policy.
Well, Rod, I will add very quickly, we had them in D.C. They went to the State Department just last week. And so, again, a lot of things are going on, but it's just not getting publicized. But I do want to now refer to my Palestinian brothers and sisters. And I really want to thank you for sharing your stories. And that's really an element that we need to do more of, to hear from your voices.
Thank you. Dr. Sabrina Dent says, thank you for sharing your stories. My thoughts are with all of you. In addition to providing humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza and in the West Bank, how can Americans take action on a policy level in addressing our elected officials on this issue? We all recognize that this is an election year with many congressional seats up. How can we put more pressure on them? See Aya shaking her head.
Max here again. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you're good. I was just gonna say, I mean, I'm sure you all know that there's local representatives, there's many different levels of policymakers and government officials that you can reach. It's not like you have to go straight to the president's door to make a statement. When I was in elementary school, they made it a point for us to go and take a field trip to the local government house here in Matthews. So we went down to the library and they introduced us to all the officials that meet there. And we have city council meetings for Charlotte as well, where the city council members come, and they often have these open door events where you can come and state your case, anything that you want the officials to be made aware of, or if you just want to voice your opinion on a matter, you can go and you're telling it to them face to face. And I know there are ways to also call policymakers, email them, and stuff like that. If that's what you're more comfortable doing, that's also a very powerful way to make a point. But it also can be such a powerful, just a powerful form to go and stand face to face to them and show them your emotion right there in that room. So I definitely recommend figuring out who your local policymakers are and your local officials, and reach out to them personally.
Amen. Thank you so much. Max?
Max, yes. Two things I would say in response to that. One is that in my experience in constantly calling and writing to the White House, to representatives, to our senators here in North Carolina, we get the standard boilerplate letters back that state totally false information. And we continually try to point that out. I think it's important to call them on it. They're still talking about beheaded babies and a total radicalization of all Palestinians. And And it's important to point out falsehoods with real facts. That's one thing. A second is that most of these representatives and senators are bought and sold. They are not going to shift, but their staffers are often idealistic, are listening, and are seeing the inconsistency with what they know to be right and true with what their bosses are doing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the goal is not so much to change the minds of these unwavering senators and representatives, but to speak truth to those with less power, the staffers.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Before we go on to the next question, just let me say that Fatima, your work, we have put a link to your work on our Facebook page for the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation, so that if you're interested in helping out, you can tap on that link there on our Facebook page. We'll also post this as part of our out of a recording from this conversation later on as well. So after this conversation, you can also join there. But would you like to say more, Fatima?
No, thank you so much for hosting this. What keeps us going is the allyship, is the solidarity, is us uplifting each other and being there for each other. And that's exactly what we need for a really long and brutal fight. Thank you.
Allyship, working together. And I love the way that Khalid started off with that story from Ecclesiastes about the three together, we need to work together. We need to stand together if we're going to foster the kind of change that we'd like to see. And I think that that is imperative right now. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I know that we are running out of time, but I don't want to stop taking questions. I think I answered Reverend Glency's question too with Dr. Dent's question. Marietta Fong, a guest, says, can anyone explain the difference between Hamas and other political entities in the Palestinian lands? Is the PLO still a viable political entity? And with whom should negotiations for peace be made? Can there be a unified front that can be addressed for the Palestinian people? I think that's a very, very difficult question. I don't know that we have political scholars on here that will want to take that on, but is there anybody that wants to weigh in on that very difficult question?
Reverend, allow me to make a comment, and I'm like you described, not a political expert or anything like that, but I've really been raised on leadership and unity and teamwork and collaboration, and what I can imagine and what can I understand from what happened when there was such a split in representation of Palestinians politically between Gaza and the West Bank. It's an effort to disunite a country, to have more confusion introduced into such a simple settler colonial issue. And you know, from my understanding, there was a question earlier on what the solution is, and I always have a simple answer to that. Justice before peace. And it doesn't mean that I'm calling for fire or for death or for anything. I'm just calling for justice before peace. So to answer that question, that is why we have thousands of politicians in the UN to take care of that for us. And I would hope that they will be ethical in their journey to address this issue, so that we don't go and face the same problem in 20 years. I would be interested to hear if there's any suggestions, more direct suggestions on what can be done.
Amen.
Well, one thing I would add to that also, Rodney, is that we need to recognize that it is in the interest of Israel to allow for an independent Palestinian state with complete autonomy, complete independence, withdrawal of all Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip, from the West Bank, a dismantling of the illegal settlements, because what we've seen, and also data, so data also, I guess, supports this argument, is that occupation, military occupation, actually is the fuel that creates resistance, creates violent resistance, and creates radicalization. And if you have studied Dr. Robert Pape's works, he's a political science professor at University of Chicago. He's written the book called Dying to Win, The Logic of Suicide Terrorism. I think that's a subtitle. All the data he's looked at from the 1980s up until today shows that over 95% of suicide terrorism is motivated by the strategic objective of getting troops to withdraw from what the group considers, the terrorist group considers to be occupied territory. So this is a lesson that the US learned when it came to Afghanistan, that our very presence in Afghanistan continued to give motive to the very existence of the Taliban. And they came right back, right, as soon as we started to withdraw. And so it's really important for those who say they want Israeli security. You can't have security unless you completely end the occupation. You have to allow Palestinians to govern themselves, irrespective of who they decide to elect. It's none of our business, I think, as Americans, to decide who should be the leaders of the Palestinian people. Let them decide, right? And just like we allow countries to elect their leaders, and sometimes, frankly, they elect leaders that are not the greatest leaders. Even in our own country, we don't always elect the best leaders, right? We're coming up to elections, and yet we don't have foreign countries intervening when we elect bad leaders. And similarly, we should not intervene when other people elect folks that we don't like.
Well, thank you for that. And I think what I heard you saying quite clearly there is something I hear at protests across the country: no justice, no peace. If we want to have firm and lasting peace, we've got to work for justice. We have to end the occupation. We have to end the imbalances in power that exist. We have to recognize the full humanity of Palestinians if we want to work for a long-time peace for Israel, as well as for Palestine, as well as for the United States. One of the things that I imagine that Dr. William Barber might say if he was standing here right now is that $14 billion that we're sending across the ocean could be used here to help the poor in our own nation. We might be able to do more to end the poverty in our own nation if we weren't perpetuating oppression and poverty in other nations. I'm sorry to have to put a close to this conversation, or this part of the conversation, but I want to let us know about other things that are going on. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Chris Burton, right now, after I just say thank you again for all the wonderful work that you've done. Chris, would you tell us about something else that's going on next week?
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much, Rodney. If you all enjoyed and really gathered so much insight from this conversation, please be sure to register for next Thursday. We have the Dahl Lecture. Dr. Hadia Mubarak will be presenting on Unlearning Islamophobia, Exploring Muslim Representations in Film. The Dahl Lecture was founded in memory of Dr. Donald Dahl and in honor of Mrs. Nancy Dahl, as a way to encourage and promote interfaith empathy, learning, and relations. So this is going to be a wonderful presentation that's going to help a lot of us really understand exactly what's going on in this current time, and understand that what's going on right now is connected to what has been happening for quite some time. So I just want to thank Dr. Mubarak in advance for the wonderful presentation she's going to give, and thank you all for registering. As you can see on the screen, feel free to register at www.upsem.edu/event/2024-DAW-lecture. And this is a free event. It's going to be not only on our Richmond campus, but also live streamed. But please register so that you can have all the information you need for the event. Thank you so much, and please do take care.
Thank you so much, Chris. And that was long. I think we should drop a link in the chat just to make sure that everybody has access to it. I'm sure we'll put a link with the recording as well, so that people can click on that, also on our Facebook page. I want to bring this conversation to a close tonight with some words of poetry rather, by Dr. Mubarak. And please.
This poem is titled A Dome of Angels. I wrote this on November 16, 2023. I will not stop believing in a God that can end this carnage tomorrow. I will not stop believing in the human capacity to choose love over hate, peace over war, life over death. So I clasp my Tangelo colored prayer beads and I write you this poem between sips of my almond milk latte because there is no time to sleep and time is running out. I call out to God by his infinite names, Al-Latif, the one who encompasses gentleness, Ar-Rahman, the giver of mercy, As-Salam, the maker of peace. Descend your salam, shalom on the hearts of our people, on the hearts of all people. Extinguish the hatred, drown out the drumbeats of those lusting for war, amplify the cries of the mother who discovers the ink-smudged letters she delicately wrote on her child's arm underneath the pulverized concrete that was once her home. Build a dome of angels above their skies. Turn the rocks in people's chests into the human hearts you once gave them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mubarak, and thank you for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you to each and every one of our guests who spoke so eloquently about their own story, their own understanding of Palestine. And may these stories live in our hearts. May these stories motivate our action. May we work together until we can see a just peace for all of the people in this land that we call holy. Let me end with just a word that reminds us that we once said never again. Never again only means never again when it means never again to anyone. Never again is only an empty slogan if it limits never only to apply to me, and the limits of again are unless by me. Never again means nothing unless it applies to everyone. Never again will I suffer. Never again will we suffer. Never again will you suffer. Never again will they suffer. Never again shall anyone suffer. And never again will I cause anyone to suffer. Never again is empty words if it just means never again by them. For never again by me is basic necessity if never again really is to be never again. It is a faulty never again if narcissistically self-focused, for it obscures the vision of what's being done to others, of what's being done by us. The world needs never again. Not empty words, not propagandizing slogans, not historical reflections, for never with again is not a phrase that applies to the past. Never again is only a phrase that begins in the present, then looks forward towards forever. And it is this kind of never again, an inclusive kind of never again, and not even by me kind of never again, a now and future kind of never again, that should be the only kind of never again we will ever say again. Let's look to the Lord as we're dismissed. God, you are gracious and you are listening. Hear our words as we cry for peace. May we be instruments of your peace. We call on you by many names, but we remain usable and useful to you. Amen. God bless you all and have a blessed evening.